everybody. Welcome to this new installment of our webinar series, ELSI Dialogues on Sex and Gender in Biomedical Research. Today, we have a wonderful speaker, Jean Lenders, Policy Officer for Gender Equality at the European Commission, who will be talking about the EU support to gender equality in research and innovation. BBMRI ERIC is a biobanking research infrastructure that facilitates access to sample and data collections across Europe. The ELSI Services and Research Unit, organizer of this webinar, aims at providing support on ethical, legal, and societal issues. Part of this goal is training, such as this webinar series, ELSI Dialogues on Sex and Gender in Biomedical Research, with which we want to raise awareness on the importance of integrating sex and gender sensitive perspectives into research and biobanking practices. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available online. And please use the chat box to write your questions. I will read them on your behalf, and Jean also will be able to read them on the chat box. And the Q&A will be a very short session at the end of Jean's presentation. So please, Jean, the floor is all yours. Welcome to this session.
Thanks a lot. And thanks for your kind introduction. So I will just start sharing my screen now. Okay, so I'm Jean Lenders, and I'm in the gender sector of the Democracy and European Values Unit in DG Research and Innovation. And Monica already kindly introduced the rest. Before I'm going a bit more into the policy and legal background of our EU support to gender equality in R&I, I first want to highlight our triennial publication, the SHE Figures. The SHE Figures measures the chronological journey from women researchers from doctoral graduate level all the way up to the highest leadership positions and grade A positions. So that's full professorship positions. SHE Figures was published last year in November. And we have seen some improvements over the years. We can see that there's almost now gender balance at doctoral graduate level, but as we go into specific fields like engineering or ICT, we still see some significant gender gaps, where we only have 22.4% of ICT doctoral graduates, for example. And as we go on, the gap widens actually, and we still have women are still underrepresented in board leadership or as board members, and also as heads of higher education institutions. For the first time, SHE Figures also includes this data on publications with a gender dimension in R&I content. So here we see that integration in publications is actually quite low. It's only 1.8%. But we actually see the highest percentage in medical and health sciences. So I think that's quite relevant for this organization, for this research infrastructures. And I mean, it can also be explained by the fact that there's a much larger body of literature available on the gender dimension in health sciences. So here on this graph, we just quickly see how the gap widens as we go on a more senior level. So from grade C to grade A positions, that's a full professorship. And this is something that's quite typical and that has been there for many years, what is also called the leaky pipeline phenomenon. SHE Figures for the first time also includes policy briefs with good practices and policy recommendations. So I recommend you have a look at this. There's a full report available under this link, but you can also check out the interactive website where we have the data per member state. And in these policy briefs, we actually look a bit more into the impact of the COVID pandemic, for example, where we see that women researchers have a lower scientific productivity or have published less in the pandemic, for example, and are also less visible in high impact journals. In the policy briefs, we also go into the STEM gap at undergraduate level, and then we talk a bit more about the gender dimension in R&I content, as well as promoting gender perspective in innovation. So that's quite new for us as well. And now more on the policy context. As you may already know, gender equality has been a priority in the European research area since 2012. And we try to achieve this through 3 specific objectives. So that's gender equality in scientific careers at all levels, gender balance in decision-making bodies and positions, and then also the integration of the gender dimension in R&I content. So sometimes the gender balance is still a bit confused with the gender dimension, but I want to stress here that the two are not the same. With the gender dimension in R&I content, we really talk about sex and gender analysis in research proposals, in the research and the innovation products that are being produced at EU level. So we aim to achieve these objectives through an institutional change approach. And with institutional change, I will go a bit more into what that means later. We have adopted the communication on the new European research area in September 2020. And there we recognize that actually these gender inequalities are hindering the era's potential. We also stress that there is a need to address diversity by opening up our gender policies to intersections with other social categories like ethnicity, disability, or sexual orientation. And for the first time, we also highlight the prevalence of gender-based violence and sexual harassment in academia, which is actually quite a big problem, but often remains a bit under-examined or unaddressed at policy-making level. So for the need to address inclusiveness, we want to do this actually on 3 levels. That's intersectionality, which I just mentioned, but also inclusiveness in terms of better involving the private sector and ensuring geographical inclusiveness. So making sure that everyone is on board, including the widening countries, to really implement this change towards gender equality. So in line with this, we have proposed the development of inclusive gender equality plans. This is very much part of our institutional change approach to foster long-term structural change at R&I organizations, together with member states and stakeholders. And member states here are actually a key player in ensuring that we meet our objectives and that also national organizations are enabled to implement their change. So they actually very strongly support our objectives for gender equality and inclusiveness. This has been set as a principle and core value of the era in the Council recommendations for a Pact for R&I in Europe that was adopted last year in November. With these Council recommendations, we also have the ERA policy agenda. And the ERA policy agenda is a set of 20 voluntary actions that the Commission and the member states will seek to implement together in the next 3 years. So these are really, this is our effort of trying to translate our commitment to gender equality into concrete actions. And there we have a dedicated action on gender equality and inclusiveness that takes note of the Ljubljana Declaration that was spearheaded by the Slovenian presidency also last year. So with this action, we have 4 concrete deliverables. The first one is to develop a policy coordination mechanism to support all aspects of gender equality through inclusive gender equality plans. So really making sure that at policy level, there's mutual learning, best practice sharing, and so on. Then very much linked to that is the strategy to counteract gender-based violence, including sexual harassment in European R&I systems. And thirdly, we just stress the need for gender equality and gender mainstreaming. And the Ljubljana Declaration actually details this a bit more. And here we also want to address intersectionality a lot more. And then fourthly, which is very important to us, are the principles for the integration and evaluation of the gender perspective in R&I content, which we will develop together with national funding organizations. So we may ask for the gender dimension to be incorporated in R&I content, but what that actually means and what makes for a good gender dimension, that's still some principles that need to be agreed on together with RFOs. So now I just want to highlight how we strengthened gender equality in our main funding program for R&I Horizon Europe. This has been strengthened on 3 levels: as an eligibility criterion, as an award criterion, and as a ranking criterion. First, for the gender equality plans, this is very much part of our structural or institutional change approach, and this doesn't come out of nowhere. We have been supporting this for over a decade now through FP7 and Horizon 2020. Over 200 organizations have been supported through 30 JEP implementing projects, and we also offer additional training and communities of practice on gender equality plans. So here you just see a bit of an overview on the gender projects that we have funded in the past years or under Horizon 2020. And I have highlighted here the GenderNet Plus project, which actually is a co-fund that funds then other projects that integrate the gender dimension in their own research. So this is very much focused on the gender dimension. There's a lot of really good examples and also recommendations from this project available. They have toolkits on how to create research or teaching curricula that consider the gender dimension. So if you're interested in this, I recommend you also have a look at this one. Now, for the eligibility criterion, this applies to public bodies, research organizations, and higher education institutions. And that means that those institutions in a member state or associated country need to have in place a gender equality plan. So that entails 4 mandatory process-related requirements, and this is a self-declaration, so it's very much based on trust. We request this at proposal stage, and it's part of your legal entity validation process that is shown here. Here you can fill in your gap under JEP, under the questionnaire. And for the 4 process-related requirements, so these are the mandatory ones, and I think you're already familiar with these. It's first having a public document that is signed by the top management and available on the institution's website. There should be dedicated resources available, such as reserved time for others to work on the implementation of your plan. Data collection and monitoring will be very important. And then also training and capacity building to tackle issues like unconscious bias, for example. Now, our stakeholders have identified additional factors, or actually essential factors for gender equality in R&I, and we recommend that these are also covered by your gender equality plan. So here, the integration of the gender dimension is, again, a very important one, and you can address this, for example, by making sure that there's the relevant expertise when it comes to projects or other research that you are conducting, where you have the relevant expertise on how to actually integrate the gender dimension. And then other aspects are also things like having measures against gender-based violence or sexual harassment. That could be a code of conduct or a protocol in case of complaints. We offer a lot of support, and our knowledge and support facility on institutional change has developed this very detailed guidance on JEPs that again has a lot of best practice examples from universities, research funding organizations, also on how they address the integration of the gender dimension in their organization. And we also offer a number of trainings for countries that have a higher amount of organizations without JEBs. So the next ones are in Romania, Poland, and the Baltic countries. We do online mutual learning workshops together with the European Universities Alliances, and there's also a work in progress on a network of national JEB contact points now. So now on the integration of the gender dimension, this is evaluated under the excellence criterion. It applies to research and innovation actions and innovation actions. For us, this really makes part of excellent research. So by considering the gender dimension, your research goes beyond the state of the art. It makes part of being a sound methodology, and you can also make use of interdisciplinary approaches. What it actually means to integrate the gender dimension, this is addressing or that means entailing or taking into account sex and gender in the whole research and innovation process. So in the design, development, and implementation of your project. In Horizon Europe, the real novelty here is that we have made this integration mandatory by default, unless the call for proposal or the topic explicitly says that this is not the case. So why is this important? You already have seen maybe the excellent webinar that was done as part of this series by Londa Schiebinger and Sabine Oerter-Prigione, and they gave a bit more background on all the different areas in health research, for example. But you can also think of car safety equipment that was traditionally designed according to male bodily standards, or facial recognition that performs less well on women with darker skin. So here the intersectional dimension of gender and race is very important. But then there's a very interesting study on climate change as well, on how warming waters actually cause a feminization of the sea turtle population. So these are all just examples of where you could consider the gender dimension. And to help researchers address this, they have developed, or our expert group on gendered innovations has developed these 15 case studies with refined methodologies on how to do sex and gender-based analysis, but also intersectional analysis to go beyond that. They have provided a number of recommendations, and our commissioner is also very supportive of this. She has given an interview in Kildare News, and there's a lot more guidance available also under the Horizon Europe program guide. So just to sum up, why is it important? Every cell is sexed and every person is gendered. So we want to look at the biological and sociological dimension, but we also believe that it brings added value in terms of excellence, rigor, reproducibility, creativity, and business opportunities. So this is just about making sure that goods and services are better suited to the needs of all citizens, and thereby we also increase the societal relevance of our research and innovation products. I just wanted to highlight some examples here on how the gender dimension matters in COVID health research. We tried to point researchers a bit into the right direction by including these little clauses like gender-related issues are an important cross-cutting priority of this expression of interest. All data should be sex and gender disaggregated, and attention should be paid to critical social factors intersecting with sex and gender, such as age, social origin, ethnicity, migration, and disability. So this is really trying to consider the sociological dimension in your research and make sure that everyone can benefit from this. Sabine Oerter-Prigione, who made the previous webinar, she also produced this case study on the impact of sex and gender in the COVID pandemic, where she's not only looking at sex differences in immune responses and sex-specific side effects of vaccines and therapeutics, but also at the more public health related aspects, such as public safety measures and having gender sensitive prevention campaigns. So it's a very broad area in which you can consider gender in all these aspects. And our own projects from Horizon 2020, they have also conducted a number of activities where we also have a webinar from a research funding organization, Community of Practice, on the importance of putting the gender perspective in COVID-19 funded research. We wanted to also look a bit more into the socio-economic impacts of the pandemic. So here we have funded under a second call for expression of interest, 5 sister projects, and Resistory here has a specific look into the impact on gender equality. So looking at gender-based violence, access to green spaces during the pandemic. It's really very interesting what they do. So I recommend you can have a look at this one as well. I already mentioned the She-Figure study and the impact on women researchers as such. But last week, we actually also kicked off our work on with the expert group on the COVID impact on gender equality in research and innovation. And they will develop a study that looks more into the negative impacts the lockdown has had on many women researchers, but also on young and early career stage researchers. And they will come with further recommendations on how to mitigate this negative impact. Then finally, just very briefly on the gender balance, this has been strengthened as a ranking criteria for ex-aequo proposals, so proposals that have the same score. Here, as a third criteria, we will consider gender balance among the research personnel, so the ones that carry out the main R&I activities. And for the first time, you can also include here the non-binary category as for your gender. I just included some extra resources here. So that's our policy webpage that is being regularly updated. The guidance, the fact sheet are here available, and also more examples on the gender dimension and the impact of COVID. And then finally, any funding opportunities you can find on our funding and tenders portal. And I hope I'm well in time, with still having enough time to address questions. But yeah, thank you very much for your attention. And if there's anything I cannot address today, then you are free to also email this email address. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think on the chat there was so far only a question asking for some more information on the upcoming event in Poland. So if you have a link or something to send us some more information on that, that would be great. And while I wait for some of the questions to come, I would like to, of course, thank you for this very informative webinar. I have to say that it is really exciting to see so many projects and so much research done integrating sex and gender in research. And I would like to hear your opinion. Do you think that we are witnessing a cultural change, or is it just that now we are paying attention to research that was already being done, and now it's like, okay, these people that have been doing this for 25 years, 30 years, now we are listening to them, or is it part of something bigger? What's your take on that?
I think for sure it has been going on for many years now. Maybe the issue is that these researchers have not always been given the right visibility or the right attention at policymaking level, but I think it's also increasing a lot with or research funding organizations becoming aware of the gender dimension. But it's for sure, it's nothing new. It's not like we are doing this only now. I think it has been accelerated a bit by certain organizations and also the Commission adopting like some very strong measures, like making the gender dimension mandatory by default. So that will for sure help, because sometimes research organizations still need a little push to actually get there.
We have one very interesting question. As far as I understand, the efforts are often targeted at the institutional and large research project level. are there incentives, requirements, support at the individual researcher level? For instance, Marie Curie individual fellowships or some kind of programs like that?
So I will say that with the ELSI and the MSCA, they fall under Horizon Europe. So the researchers that are then affiliated to a certain organization, they will need to have a JEP in place as well. So if in that case you also address the integration of the gender dimension or all these other issues, then that can be supported through your affiliation as well. And of course, we have maybe a bit less influence on what individual projects do, but we would encourage everyone to look at this because it's super important to make it more relevant.
Yeah, about the JEPs, the Gender Equality Plan, I think that a lot of institutions are facing a challenge with the Gender Equality Plan, and there is one question related to the deadline for if the Gender Equality Plan needs to be in place, so published on the website of the institution at the date of proposal submission or at grant agreement date.
This is at grant agreement stage. So for sure, we will ask at proposal stage already for the JEP, but this is for our own statistical and monitoring purposes. So even if you, as an organization, because you are an NGO or civil society organization, if you do not need to have a JEP in place, we will still ask you whether you have one. So that could be a bit confusing for some because they are asked at proposal stage, but when we will check it, this is at grant agreement stage. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the clarification. One of the questions is concerning the integration of non-binary people in gender equality plans. What are the concrete actions that the European Commission will take to integrate this perspective, this non-binary perspective on sex and gender in research and also at the institutional level?
Okay, so here I want to maybe go in the 3 different criteria that we have. We already consider it with the ranking criteria. So when you, in the proposal, when you give the clarification on who's in your consortium, you can indicate the non-binary category. In the gender equality plan itself, this is part of our efforts of making JEPs inclusive, what I highlighted in the policy background. So we are still working with member states and our stakeholders on what inclusiveness means and how to best implement this. I will also say that we launched a study on how to better address intersectional aspects and LGBT issues, for example. And here we see, for example, that already in the measures that look at harassment and gender-based violence, a lot of organizations are already good at not only doing this for women, but also for LGBT people. So that's one example of where non-binary or trans persons can be considered. But again, this is still in development, and we will also actually have, under the widening participation and strengthening the European research area, a new think tank, or a center of excellence, we call it, to develop more guidance on how to best make JEPs more inclusive and also consider these intersectional aspects. So that's very much up and coming.
I have a follow-up question on this. Is this based the marking when people are women, men, or non-binary? Is this based on self-presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, that is very interesting. And now you mentioned intersectionality, and one of the questions is concerning intersectionality. They ask, if intersectionality is encouraged, could the gender equality plan actually be called equality plan, or should disability, nationality, etc. aspects be included under the gender equality aspects?
So what you call your JEP is for us not so important. You can call it a diversity action plan, you can call it an inclusion plan. For us, or just for Horizon Europe, we will look at whether those 4 mandatory parts are there. Then what else you try or you want to do with your JEP, that's very much up to your organization and how to best tailor it to the situation of your own organization, because it has to make sense within your context. So if you want to address disability within this plan or make a separate plan on disability, that's very much up to your organization. I would just say that the support of the top management is super important for this. So yeah, try to involve the people that are making the decisions as soon as possible.
One question is also regarding the review of the gender equality plan. Some are asking who reviews the gender equality plan and if it has some weight in the award, when awarding a project or not.
So for awarding the project, we just check whether it's there and whether the 4 mandatory parts are checked. That's just whether you like the eligibility criterion. Then throughout the course of Horizon Europe, we want to do random compliance checks, because at grant agreement stage, this is still based on trust. When you say you have it, we do not ask for a document to upload. We do not ask for additional information. So this is based on trust. But then throughout Horizon Europe, we will do these random compliance checks, where we will look at what the JEP actually looks like. Is it on your website? I mean, for us to find it, that would be important. And all the other requirements met. And I think we are also looking into whether this actually has an impact, because we of course want to monitor how this is going and if we how to adapt our policies in the years to come.
I have one question that is a curious, I'm curious about some perception from you. How has the reception been of these initiatives? If you have been talking with institutions or leadership from institutions, or also with individual researchers, how has this reception been? Because you highlight the European Commission highlights the institutional change. So it is not only just one more step. It's not a checklist. It's not just a thing that can be done bureaucratically. It aims at something deeper. So how has the reception of this institutional change, the encouragement to perform this institutional change been?
You mean from other organizations or from the
like the climate? What have you been feeling in the climate, talking with other people, institutions, researchers?
Well, we have, of course, our stakeholders that have been pushing for this for many years. So with them, they were very enthusiastic about this finally becoming an eligibility criterion, because it can be really a powerful tool to accelerate our change that is more on a sustainable or long-term level, because those plans will be reviewed, they can be adapted. So it's not just a box-ticking exercise, as you said. But we also, of course, notice that there are many organizations that still do not have a JEP in place and that are now rushing to do so. And for that, we also saw really the need to provide a lot more training. So we've spoken at a lot of events with a lot of organizations, and we are doing these targeted trainings in specific countries that have less JEPs in place. So yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a mixed reception of it, but I would say that overall it was welcoming. I think people realize as well that it's a value. It's not just for getting EU funding. This is part of making sure that your organization is inclusive and is aware of certain unconscious biases, of certain barriers that still exist. And I think with the SHE figures, that also shows that there's still a need for such action.
Yeah, I personally am elated that this institutional change is being encouraged. And I think that it can only bring good things for the future of research and innovation, because it was also due. A lot of people were encouraging it for a very long time, and this is very, very important that it is being aimed at the institutional level as well. And I think that also the process of the gender equality plan is very fascinating within an institution, and it's a learning process that is very, very interesting to do as well. And of course, the integration of also the gender and sex perspectives into research, it also gives a different perspective to research that has already been done. So it is really, really cool that we are embarked in this process together. I think we don't have any more questions, and I think it is time to let you go.
Okay, I will just post then the website link here. Yeah. So there should also be the information about the different trainings that are available. So yes. I'm not sure what are the deadlines now for signing up to the trainings, but it should be there.
Okay, thank you very much for everything. I think that, well, I think now a few more questions popped up, but as we said at the beginning, we had to cut the webinar a bit short, and I'm sure that also Jan will be available to answer questions via email. And of course, the audience can also participate in these trainings that are very, very informative. Thank you very much for being with us today, and see you very soon.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions.
Thank you very much.